My presentation will be divided in three subjects. So first, we will look at why livestock sector. So why livestock sector matters. And then we will look at the global emissions, especially from enteric methane emissions from the livestock sector. And I will just give you an overview of FAO's work on addressing methane around the world. So to start this, I just want to come here and just address those three planetary crises that have been defined by the UN. First is the air pollution and biodiversity loss and the climate change. And as you know, we have many international agreements to address those planetary crises, the Sustainable Development Goals being one of the agreements where almost all countries have signed off on SDGs. Of course, we have the Paris Agreement, which was adopted during the COP in Paris in 2015. And this has been one of the start of the global engagement on climate change for almost all countries. We have 196 countries that have signed on Paris Agreement. And of course, I think you are aware that recently in Montreal, there is the new agreement on the global biodiversity framework, which is mostly interesting because it's target 7, address nitrogen and phosphorus pollution, and where livestock is a biggest player. So as you know, livestock contribute to the livelihood and food security of 1 billion of people globally. It supports many rural areas and provide many functions beyond food, because it provides social and economic functions. It's also a biggest source of energy and also proteins for our diet. And in the past, especially in about 60 years ago, since we started counting the statistics on livestock, we see that the sector has been growing in all areas. Some sectors being stable. For example, in the US, I think the dairy sector took a different pace, where the number of animals reduced. But around the world, all sectors has been growing, especially all animal species. And this has been driven by an increasing demand for animal products, especially in the new markets, looking at Asia as one of the biggest new markets. And of course, the income and the urbanization, as well as the population growth has been also the other driver. Of course, we know that the other driver are mainly related to easy of shipping. So now it's easy to trade globally. So the efficiency of the different vessels transporting different commodities, their capacities in loading many commodities has been really the key for the international trade. And of course, the other aspect is the speed. So before you could take many days to reach a place, but now it's much more easier. So of course, this is well reflected in the commodity growth. If we look at the milk production, for example, we see that in many regions, it has been growing fast, especially driven by Asian countries. This is the same if we look at the meat. Meat production is also growing, and we see that many regions, especially Asian countries, are the one driving highly the meat consumption in the world. And we see that, of course, this is a kind of same thing for almost all regions. If you look at, of course, the livestock has several externalities. To grow such faster, that creates some externalities. The first is the amount of land that we need to produce the animal products. So 25%, especially of all land available, is allocated to the livestock. Especially this is much more for grassland, because animals are really, especially in the rangeland and ranching systems. So we use more land. And we see that if you look at the agricultural land, 77% will be mainly allocated to the land, to the livestock. And I think for the arable land, so the one where we cultivate crop, 40% is for the livestock. And I think most of that land is allocated to the monogastrics, especially chicken and pigs. And in terms of emissions, FAO estimated that the global livestock sector contributes around 40.5% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. So, of course, having the sector growing, of course, the inputs that we need are also growing, especially the feed. So if you look at this graph, you will see that mostly what is growing is the monogastric sector in terms of feed demand. So pigs and poultry are really using much more feed required, while you see that in terms of ruminants, the amount of feed used for ruminants is kind of slightly declining. However, if you look at the emissions, you know that methane has two main sources. So one is the natural sources, especially with the wetland and wildfire, sorry. But we have also the anthropogenic sources. In terms of anthropogenic sources, we see that enteric fermentation, especially in ruminant, is contributing to 28%, but large share is coming from the fossil fuel and waste that's combined are around 55%. And of course, we see also that rice production and manure management are also contributing to methane emissions. But if you see this graph, of course, enteric fermentation is really important to address if we want to reduce methane emissions. And as you know, I think you are familiar with this graph. It's addressing methane is a quite good deal for climate, because this allows to reduce at least 0.2 degrees Celsius in terms of global warming, in terms of the global average temperature increase. And then when you look at the emission within the ruminant sector, we see that in total we have 104 million million ton of methane, so it's not the CO2 equivalent. And this is quietly shared almost equally between meat production and milk production for all the species. So in terms of distribution, so this is the absolute emissions of enteric methane globally estimated by FAO, and we see that it's quite evenly distributed, so with high concentration of emissions, especially in India. And this India, China, Africa, and some part of the United States. But this is mainly also associated with the concentration of the animals in those areas. Because if you look at the emission intensity, the picture is different, right? So because the emission intensity are related to the productivity. So we see that regions like Africa or part in Asia and Latin America, where the productivity is low, of course, the emission intensity are high. So this is an opportunity, actually, to address emissions, especially by reducing the emission intensity. But as you know, reducing emission intensity is not enough, because if you don't act on animal numbers, of course, then the total emission will increase, which is the situation of US. So therefore, you need other solutions. So that's where I want to go through quickly on FAO's work on reducing enteric methane. So to start this, I want just to start with LEAP, so which is the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Partnership. So this partnership, I'm happy to see many contributors to the partnership. Frank was our first chair of the partnership. Tim is here as well, has been the chair of LEAP as well, and also chairing many technical committee, and Ermias in the back, and other colleagues that I see in the room that I cannot identify straight away, but I know that there are many here in the room that has been contributing to the LEAP. So LEAP is unique in nature because LEAP is a multi-stakeholder initiative composed of governments, private sector, civil society organizations, and NGOs. And it has been working for the last 10 years to provide harmonization, international agreed methodologies, data, and metrics to assess the environmental performance of livestock sector. So here I'm just choosing two documents that I think are very relevant for this conference. The first one is how do we assess the impact of using a feed additive? So this document is very comprehensive, and I invite you to look at it on the LEAP website because it provides the insight on how to use, how to account for emission reduction when using any type of feed additive. So it's looking on feed additives that can address, of course, enteric methane, but also that can address other issues, especially nitrogen issues and so on. The second document that we will release very, very soon is the methane emission in livestock and rice systems. This is mainly a report that is exploring the sources, sinks, quantification, mitigation, and the metrics of methane. Is the first report that is very comprehensive, complete. I believe that we have explored all the knowledge that is really available, at least for what we are aware of. So, and I think this is a game changer as a report, especially that all the issues and the solutions that are possible are explored. And we will launch this in September in Rome, and I invite you, of course, if you can join us in Rome, you are most welcome for the launch of the report. So FAO also support the capacity building, especially mainly through the blended e-learning curricula that we have produced many courses that are available online. They are available for free of charge. So I think they can be very useful for students or any practitioners that want to understand the key issues of livestock and the climate change. And we continue to produce them, especially focusing on climate finance, because we believe that without proper financing, it's difficult to reduce emissions. So those are some of the forthcoming courses that we will develop. So the other issue is that through different projects, we are supporting the national climate actions. It was good to see that the Undersecretary was also highlighting the measurement, reporting, and verification. Of course, it's difficult to address something you don't know, right? So we are helping many countries to understand the status of methane emissions from their livestock systems, and also identifying how to integrate more commitment in their nationally determined contributions. And beside that, it's also important to align the commitment with the policy, because without a good alignment, it's difficult to address the issue, because of course I do understand the aspect of using the voluntary-based approach, but sometimes it doesn't work. So it depends on the willingness of the farmers, because they are the farmers, producers, and private companies that are supporting them and how they want to address. But of course, in many cases, you need really proper policy to accompany the voluntary initiatives. So some examples, we kind of demonstrated that even in developing markets, we can reduce emissions by just manipulating the diet. So this is very interesting because we see that animals are not well fed in many parts of the world, and really improving the diet is one big entry point to reduce emissions without even using an additive, because here there is no additive used. So just to say that maximizing the potential for animals is one of an interesting step that we can take, and then beside that, innovation is needed. So meaning that we can address methane by a certain level of percentage reduction without just using technology. So just using the knowledge we have in terms of feed and feeding strategies. It's the same that we tested in feed rods in Uruguay, and we see that with many solutions that can be applied, especially providing more proteins to the animals in Uruguay, has also a good effect on emissions. Because most of the cattle systems in Uruguay, they are producing natural grass, especially on La Pampa, so which actually has many issues in terms of the nutritional values of the native grasses. So let's go on one interesting part, is then how do we invest in this? So it's a very interesting era, I think, for livestock sector, because it's the first time that the Green Climate Fund is willing to support a full 100% livestock project, which will focus on reducing methane. It's called Pathway to the Net Zero. I think you may have heard about this. Is an initiative that is highly promoted by the Global Dairy Platform with many partners. And this is a project that FAO, IFAD, the Global Methane Pledge, Global Methane Hub, USAID, Global Dairy Platform, and other are supporting. So far, we have received an approval for 3.5 million to prepare the project. And we hope that within the next 2 years, we will be able to put together a proposal for 400 million USD for 4 countries in East Africa. And of course, this is raising the appetite for many other countries. We see that also Latin America, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Uruguay would like to do the same. And we believe that other countries will really join this movement. So because I believe investment is needed, investment is important. And of course, we cannot help farmers if we don't invest in the livestock sector. So I don't know if you know how much money in terms of climate finance is invested in the livestock sector so far. So do you know the number? Okay, so actually 2 to 5% of the climate finance goes to the livestock sector. It's just nothing. And about 2% of the total climate finance goes to methane mitigation. So we are still far away behind when, of course, everyone is turning to others saying, okay, please, guys, reduce emissions. But there is no investment, so how can we do that? So I think we continue to call many partners to reconsider the way livestock has been treated, to make sure that we can find enough investment to address livestock at all scales, from scales to the large scales. So, of course, this requires more dialogue, and one of the important dialogue is the policy dialogue. And we believe that bringing, especially our policymakers together to continue to raise awareness, to continue to showcase the solutions is one way to address the problem. And I think we are making progress, but we still have a long way to go. So we will continue to work hard to make sure that we can mobilize more from our policymakers to address the issues. And one way FAO is doing that is by providing evidence. For example, we just released this report on the contribution of terrestrial animal source food to healthy diets. As you know, many folks here, maybe out there, have been saying that animal products are not good for our health, but we are demonstrating that actually we need animal food at all age, at all level. So this is very important, and I think it's one of successful report. Actually, so far, more than 200 million people have downloaded or just get in touch of this report since it was published yesterday, just a week ago. The second report is the soy carbon. Of course, I didn't want to go much more in the details of soy carbon, but soil is one of the biggest sink for carbon. And we demonstrated with this report that actually our soil, especially on the grassland, has a huge potential to accumulate additional carbon. And farmers have been doing that, and actually they are not recognized for what they are doing. So this is another way of really showing that in terms of sink, we don't have many sink that are quite manageable. And our farmers are the ones actually doing that every day. So they should be recognized for this. So this is what this report is also providing. So just to conclude, it's important that we raise our ambition in terms of methane reduction commitments in all countries, actually. And this can help to limit the global the average global temperature increase toward 2 degrees or below 1.5. But we know that this is not really a goal for only livestock sector. It's really for everybody. Actually, in terms of our contribution, energy sector is the biggest one. So we need to make sure that what we do is also done across other sectors. Otherwise, our effect will be quite minimal. The second aspect is the innovation and technology, but the issue is not about really how to do it. It's really mainly the transfer of that technology in different markets where there is no much access or there is no much knowledge. So to make sure that we can scale up those technologies and the tools that are available in different markets. And of course, it's important to make sure that any methane reduction strategies that are adopted are providing multiple benefits, both for food security, for the income of farmers, but also especially in the preservation of our biodiversity. So on that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and yeah, thank you. So happy to take some questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Uwizeye? Oh, one in the front.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the financial mechanism you mentioned just now. So I noticed that in your presentation, you mentioned that there's a lack of funding going to livestock and methane, and you also emphasized the importance of supporting capacity building by promoting financial mechanism. So I'm just wondering what type of financial mechanism you are trying to promote and in what places? Thank you.
Okay, I can respond still. Yeah, thank you. I think climate finance is providing an opportunity to really understand how to make the financing sustainable, because that's one of the problem, because we know that climate solutions are really not short-term solutions, so they are quite long-term. So within the UN, especially through our international financial institutions, so there are two types of, no, actually many types of financing, depending on which country we are talking about and also depending on which production system. So especially for small scale, we tend to go with grants, which provides more, let's say, seed money for the local enterprises, small-scale enterprises, really to kick off in this. But we see that as there is quite huge demand for financing, so one of the aspects that we are promoting is more the private sector financing mechanism, especially by bringing in local banks. That can, for example, financing can support more kind of a reduction of interest rates, for instance. But we believe that that mechanism is very interesting, especially that will help farmers to get loan at very low cost, what we call green loan, and also it can help refinancing, so the system can continue to refinance itself. So there are other financial mechanisms that are also used. I think the World Bank is more using what we call finance to results. So it means that they provide a certain amount of money to a country. They will implement a methane mitigation strategy, if I take an example. And if they achieve the result, they will get the money back. So that is another approach that the World Bank is using in some, especially middle-income countries that can have the capacity to auto-finance. And I think it's working as well. So, and there are many of those. Then coming back to the capacity building, because capacity building is quite much more, we believe that is quite much more easier, but the problem is not well organized. Because now we see that folks can access internet everywhere. So that's why we decided to make sure that knowledge is quite available online for free. We are making sure that we disseminate those content, and we see that we can also disseminate that in different languages. That's also one of our goals, and we provide through different bilateral agreements with certain countries. They can also translate and do the capacity building directly within the country, and it's working. So I think that's one way, because climate issues in agriculture are quite new. It's really new science. Maybe we have been working on this for quite some years, but for many people out there, it's quite new. So first to understand, to know how to act and what to do, and also how to make money while doing it. So those are quite complex. Maybe I will come back when we go to the panel discussion. I will come back on these issues in terms of our priority for research. Thank you. Another question?
Thank you. In many parts of the world, in Africa, parts of Asia, livestock are also used as draft animals to plough fields, for transport. In some cultures, they're a sign of social status. In other cultures, they're a sign of wealth, so a bank account. How is that? Obviously complicates, of course, you're not just looking at food. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think the multifunctionality of livestock is quite interesting, and we have now started within the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Partnership a new technical advisory group that will deal with ecosystem services, really to understand the value that livestock provide. Because so far, let's say that we have adopted the life cycle assessment, where we look at the product as, let's say, meat and dairy or eggs, and sometimes we miss those values. But in one of the guidelines, especially the one we developed on large ruminants, where animals are mainly used for many services, especially draft, and so we recommend mainly to consider the wealth management as an entry point on how, because those are the services that those animals provide, which we can quantify those services, because by just looking at the cost of the alternative, and consider that within the LCA approach. But of course, I see that it's quite still difficult for many folks to do that. So therefore, that's why livestock is seen as, let's say, a commodity-oriented, even by name, livestock, so as a commodity-oriented sector. But of course, it's more embedded in the culture and also the religious values of different societies. So those are the issues that we need to consider. And that's why we believe that finding a solution to address the problem of livestock is better than just eliminating livestock. So, and I believe that I don't see any country that is willing to do that anyway. So because of the social value or the economic value, even the religious value of the animals.
Other questions?
Yes, I was just curious if or how carbon credits might play a role in some of the climate financing conversations that have been happening.
Yeah, you mean the carbon credit? So I think we are seeing many, as you know, carbon credits has started as voluntary markets. So mainly because they are under Article 6 of Paris Agreement. And the workbook on how to operationalize them has been adopted in Glasgow, but still there is no clear agreement between countries on how to do that. But let's go to what is happening now, which is a voluntary market. So we are seeing many examples. For instance, we see that some even pastoralists, small-scale farmers, in Kenya, were able to sell more than $16 million to Microsoft in carbon credit because of their effort to restore land, especially the land degradation, and also to manage the livestock in Kenya. So that's with a facilitator, especially with with Vera as a certifying agency. So they were able to do that. So in other countries, for instance, in France, they are using the RIP guidelines as the basis of their methodology to set up mitigation options with farmers to monitor the farming practices over 1 or 2 years. And most of the emission reduction from those farms in France are sold to the service companies, especially banks and insurance companies. And we see that it's very lucrative. I think they are receiving up to 40 euros, which is around $43 per ton of carbon. And farmers are very happy because actually the money is going in their pocket, not to the pocket of anybody. So they see really the benefit of what they are doing. And we believe that this is one of the best way to provide incentives. And of course, there is a lot to be done because they say that the oldest carbon credit in livestock has been around the manure, especially on the production of biogas. And that has been maybe going on for many years, and starting in Brazil. I think the first carbon credit was sold in Brazil. And I think now even there are still more opportunities for manure management, especially on the biogas production. So because on energy, there is a direct linkage to the market, which is the national grid. Yeah, so I believe that in the future there will be more opportunities, but still we still need to understand how, because there are many mechanisms around, and that vary from a country to a country.